Good morning, whoever happens to be up and watching. Remember, it's a different channel. You have to subscribe to this channel. Oh, lovely. Got a spot on my nose. Now you won't be able to see anything but that all day. Right, what's going on? Housekeeping stuff. Yeah, it's my birthday next week. So I think it's next week. Yes, my birthday week next week. So I won't be doing much. I suspect, though that probably means more videos rather than less because I enjoy doing them. So we'll see how that goes. What else is going on? Hoping to get the card game proofs soon. Those should be coming through. Podcast that I do related to trigger warning should be launching today, perhaps, possibly, maybe, perhaps, or at least the trailer for it officially dropping. I already did before, but there you go. What am I currently working on? My Cyberpunk campaign for next year, which isn't paying, but I'm going to retroclone Cyberpunk essentially. I've decided, so it kind of works towards that, and otherwise I'm doing stuff for Machinations of the Space Princess. That's the thing I'm currently working on, and I'm planning for next year. But I tend to take December easy because it's my birthday month, and then there's Christmas and holidays and all that kind of shit that goes on. If the game streaming has tailed off, it's because I'm trying to catch up with stuff on the Nintendo Switch, which I don't play as much as I should. And you can't live stream from that without a separate capture card and whatever. So yeah, that's why you're not necessarily seeing so much. All the manifestos from the major parties have now dropped, but if you watched my video yesterday on my main channel, I am pretty much at the end of my tether with people after seeing the Tories having a 19-point lead and people still defending Brexit. And when I lost my rag and had to go at people about it, they're acting like I've been calling everyone stupid or whatever since forever, which isn't the case. This is me finally running out of patience. I've tried to be accommodating and understanding, but even then, people are giving me the same old guff. EU army. There isn't a plan for an EU army. It's about closer cooperation, NATO style. But what can you do about people? Eh? So let's launch into the news. I still have to help. That was unfair. That sounded like I was complaining. I still have to help my mum because she's still not particularly well with this trochanteric pain syndrome thing. So I have to help her walk the dog. But I might come back and do the Conservative Manifesto this afternoon, the same way I did the Labour one, just to still try and be fair. But almost the instant it came out, it was debunked. They were talking about 50,000 new nurses, but that's including nurses that are already in process and hoping to encourage nurses to stay. And the money they've earmarked isn't enough for the amount of nurses that they say they're adding. So there's already problems with it. It will be incredibly difficult to be impartial, but I will do my best, I guess. But it's not a ton of news stories today, so let's get them done so I can reply to comments and do other stuff. which I'll do at the end. I think that's everything, planning-wise and so on. Yeah, I'm trying to plan for next year. I didn't get as much done this year as I would have hoped, or some of the big projects that I wanted to get done. It's a matter of finding the time and making it work, I guess. But we'll see. Anyway, on to the news, much of which is UK general election related, as you may guess. Right, so one of the things that Labour talked about was sort of reining in landlords and creating a rent rise cap for private tenants. England, Britain as a whole, has never particularly been a renting kind of place. Everyone aspires to own their own home. This can seem a bit odd to some continental Europeans, the Dutch especially, I think, where the vast and overwhelming majority of people rent, but they have a lot more rental rights and they can do things to the houses that they rent. And in some ways it's more affordable housing, but you're throwing money away on something without getting anything. Here in Britain, we really, really value property. We like to own our homes and so on. It can seem weird to people, but people are willing to take truly crippling mortgages in order to own a home. But things have been shifting more and more to rental because the price of houses has gone up and up and up and up and up because a lot of property speculators buy in Britain, and because the right to buy scheme brought in under Margaret Thatcher demolished the social housing net, and a lot of people bought their way onto the property ladder relatively cheaply back then because they were buying what were old council houses and then doing them up a bit. So house prices have been inexorably on the rise, which is good for people who own them, not so good for everybody else or for anyone trying to buy onto that property ladder. So rent has become a problem, slumlords have become a problem, swathes of empty property, especially in big cities like London, has become a problem. It's being used to launder money. It's an issue, but on the practical human level, it's rent that's the problem, and people can basically be thrown out for no reason. Rents can be raised virtually without control, and so on. So one of Labour's key manifesto pledges, well, I don't know, important manifesto pledges, was that they want to put bad landlords out of business and bring in rent controls, which is a good thing that would really help a lot of people. And they want to make sure that tenancies are open-ended rather than set limits, so you can't just be thrown out on someone's say-so. So it should make things better for people who are renting, it should depress the rental market a bit, and it should contribute to bringing down house prices. At least that's the intention. Whether that will be the effect remains to be seen. Labour's also talked about bringing in you have to get a regular test for your car to make sure that it's roadworthy. It's like a MOT, it's called. They just check that all the basics are working and that it's not going to explode in the middle of the road or whatever, and it's safe enough to drive. So they're on about bringing in a sort of MOT for buildings. So your property would have to be checked over to make sure that it's fit for purpose. And if it wasn't, it's the landlords that would be hit with fines or forced repayments, that sort of thing, if the properties are found to be substandard. So the idea is that will encourage them to make sure that they're livable, that they're not rife with mould or vermin or whatever else. And that might be a bit punitive for lower level renters, but for these slumlords and mass property owners, that seems reasonable to me. But I would want exceptions, because a lot of people have gone into property as their pension pots have diminished, as their pension payouts have diminished. So they've bought property and they've rented it out as a form of supplementary pension, and they couldn't afford to do this kind of stuff. So I hope there'll be exceptions for small-scale landlords, but without any loopholes, but we'll see. The Tories are kind of doing similar things, but it's not anywhere near to the extent that Labour's saying. They want to scrap the no-fault evictions, but there isn't a great deal of other help, particularly for them. These scandals are just on and on and on. To give you an idea of how the landscape has changed for properties in the UK, back in '97, which was the previous big Labour win, right? About 10.5% of properties in England specifically, were rented. Now it's 21%. That's after the economic squeeze. That's after the problems with pensions and so on, and after the proliferation of rental as a kind of part-time career for a lot of people. So that's pretty bad. Labour claims that 1 in 4 properties that are rentals are not decent, meaning they're damp, cold, in a state of disrepair, or otherwise unsafe or uncomfortable to live in, which is a problem. The desperation for extra housing has led the Conservative government to loosen planning regulations, which means that former commercial properties, that can mean stuff in shopping centres, that can mean warehousing and so on, is being converted to housing, but at a lower standard. But it's a way of essentially shifting the definition of the property from commercial to housing, bypassing a lot of legislation that's supposed to make these things livable. Why we can't do what we did post-war and have prefabs so that we can rapidly pop up housing for people, I don't know. And why we can't, say that you can't leave a property empty for more than a certain amount of time without selling it on or renting it out, I don't know. These would be other solutions. Yes, monetary insecurity, poverty, and so on. Rent is a big part of that, and while people on low income can get assistance or full payments for their rent under housing benefit, the problem with universal credit is that it has squeezed that as well as everything else, and a lot of suspensions and so on have gone on under universal credit. So you might get sanctioned, I think they call it, where your benefits get stopped for a while they figure out something. It's never particularly clear what, and that means your payments for your housing can go, and then you just can't afford to pay the rent. And if you go too far into arrears, the landlord's perfectly in their rights to kick you out at a moment's notice, even though it's not your fault that the rent's not being paid. So go figure, really. So yeah, this has become something of an electoral topic, housing. Not enough, in my point of view. And from my point of view, it all stems back to Thatcher's right to buy scheme, which has just gutted social housing. It's one of the main things, I think, in Labour's manifesto that both A, isn't crazy, and B, would make a huge impact to a lot of people's lives. But there you go. Sticking with the election, the Tories have been up to some dark shit in their campaign. There was the rebranding of the Conservative Twitter account claiming to be a fact-checking site, which they weren't. That's been somewhat controversial. And they put up a fake website purporting to be the Labour Manifesto site with a whole bunch of bullshit on it and all their talking points and attack lines against Labour's manifesto. That would be fine, I think, if it was a separate activist group or something, though, you'd have to be sure it was actually separate. Something similar was done for the Tories manifesto, but that was done by activists separately off their own back and nothing to do with the Labour Party. When political parties are engaging in this kind of brazen and deliberate acts of misinformation and confusion, it increases cynicism and skepticism, which is good, but it crosses that line into hyper-skepticism when no one trusts anything. And that's not good for a democracy, I don't think. And at the moment, it's just the Conservative Party doing it. And that's just the two big things that we can see. It's the Dominic Cummings playbook, right? It's the same thing that happened during the Vote Leave campaign and before. Mass amounts of disinformation, so nobody really knows what's true, and they're forced into kind of tribal, emotional lines rather than intelligent, analytical ways of examining what's going on and what kind of decision they want to make. It just harms the process of democracy, which ideally should be about facts, right? Now, the maker of the World Wide Web, the inventor of the World Wide Web, the visual version of the web, Tim Berners-Lee, has come out condemning this, which should mean a lot. He's described it as brazen, that it's unbelievable that a mainline political party would act in such a way, that it's impersonation, that it shouldn't be allowed, that it should be against terms of service, and so on. You should hold our politicians to a higher standard, not a lower standard. I mean, everyone's critical and cynical of politicians right now. Oh, they always lie. What difference does it make? Well, we should hold them to a higher standard, I think. But they're just brazening it out, and nobody's really challenging them enough on it. It's something that a lot of people are complaining about. I mean, for all people complain about the media having a left-wing bias, particularly the BBC, it doesn't seem to. Laura Kuenssberg in particular has come in for criticism. There just seems to be this fake equivalence and facilitation of particularly conservative talking points. It's what's happened is that the BBC charter that made them publicly funded but separate to the government has been eroded over successive years. So now they're kind of afraid of whoever's in power and don't want to rock the boat too much regarding whoever's in power. At least that's my read of the situation. And I think we need to reassert the BBC's independence, because it's dropped in quality as it has become less independent. He's not the only one to speak out about these problems. Sacha Baron Cohen did recently as well, talking about how Facebook is this massive propagandist tool and how they're not... It's weird to see these big people talking about how something like Facebook is not exercising care and restraint or control over their platform, while at the same time they are censoring people on a personal basis, and we'll get to some more of that in a bit. So they're not interfering in politics, even when it's people using underhanded and often illegal methods, as they did during the Leave referendum. They're not intervening there, but they will intervene on a personal basis to censor you as an individual, while allowing collective groups like political parties to get away with murder. That's crazy. Leaks is another thing that's quite controversial. You know, you talk about Edward Snowden or Julian Assange or whoever else, and people cast aspersions as to what their motivations are and whether they're traitors or whatever else. Same thing with bugger, gonna have to dead name them because I can't remember their current name. Bradley Manning, who transitioned. Yeah, people call them a traitor as well. So when someone leaks something you don't want them to leak, they're a traitor to their country. When someone leaks something that you do think should be leaked, you know, they're a hero. Surely we should be consistent, and if they're leaking something that is illegal or horrible or to the detriment of the country and to your politics or whatever, surely we should celebrate that, whoever's doing it and whoever they're leaking about, you would think. So this has been thrown into sharp relief because of a massive data leak about China, and how China is running its internment camps, and how it's attempting to brainwash people. We also saw this weekend footage of Hong Kong prisoners being packed up in trains. That's not sinister at all. Doesn't remind me of anything from the early 20th century. But being packed up into trains and shipped off God knows where. Disappeared like Tank Man was, perhaps. We'll see. We've also had elections in Hong Kong, which have returned massively pro-democracy people. But anyway, the leak comes out, which doesn't hold out much hope for these poor sods who are being dragged away. The leaks have revealed details about China's internment camps for Muslims, and this probably includes internment camps for political dissidents as well. So these are big, high-security places, loads of guard towers, quite modern looking, very high wall. Trump would be proud. And they're just being shut away in there, in the, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Jin Jiang? Xinjiang, Zhang, isn't it? Jin Jiang. In that region, So they're being shut away there and offered voluntary education and training. At least that's the Chinese line on it. Actually, they're being locked up, indoctrinated, and punished. If you can find the BBC Panorama show on iPlayer or whatever else, they do an expose on it. China's UK ambassador has dismissed this as fake news. It's weird how that's become a tool of oppressive and shitty people in government when it was meant to be a criticism of genuine problems in the media originally and to get them dealt with, but it's become this dismissal phrase, thought-terminating cliche. But the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists released this, working with nearly 20 media partners, including BBC Panorama and The Guardian. So it's not The Guardian writing this, if you don't trust The Guardian for whatever reason. It's not the BBC writing this necessarily, if you don't trust them. But those are two of the main places you can go and you can see these reports, which I suggest you do. This is actually something I did read about beforehand, which kind of goes against the whole ethos of this show, but there you go. So about 1 million people, mostly from the Muslim Uyghur community, I think I'm pronouncing that right, Uyghur. They've all been detained there without trial. And these leaked documents go back at least to 2017. And the instructions there are given to run them as high security prisons, strict discipline, punishments, no escapes allowed. So one of these memos, I'm relying on a translation thing here, it says, never allow escapes, increase discipline and punishment of behavioural violations, promote repentance and confession, make remedial Mandarin studies the top priority, so they're trying to enforce language. Who does that sound like? Encourage the students to truly transform and to ensure full video surveillance coverage of dormitories and classrooms with no blind spots. So they're completely monitored, they're completely controlled, they're forced into speaking a particular language, not allowed to move their beds. When they join queues, they have to take a particular position, they have to take particular seats in a classroom, particular seats during work. Everything is absolutely and completely strictly regulated, and you're punished if you go over the line even slightly. They've got particular rules for getting up, doing roll call, washing, going to the toilet, organising, housekeeping, eating, studying, sleeping, when they should and shouldn't close the door and whatever. It's just, that all sounds petty, and taken individually, none of those things is particularly harsh. And that probably reminds many of us of our time at school. But it's so rigidly and ruthlessly enforced, and it's all the time, and it's to encourage obedience. And ironically, this is kind of what Islam does to a lot of people in its own territories. It's utterly ruthless with anybody who disagrees. But that doesn't make this right. Two wrongs don't make a right. Or in this case, I guess two wongs don't make a right. It's wrong to do this to people. Now, I'm fiercely anti-religious, but this kind of repression is not how you deal with the problem. I mean, that's proven. Even Stalin had to come to an accommodation with the church in Russia, the Orthodox Church, and used them, in fact, as a tool, despite communism supposedly being an atheist ideology. Not that there's really such thing as an atheist ideology, but yeah, it just goes to show, the more you suppress people in this way, it just drives it underground, like it did with the purges of the Catholics in the UK all those centuries ago. It just doesn't work, and basically they're being forced and threatened and beaten and tortured and punished and made to take the state ideology as their be all and end all. It's treating Chinese communism as a cult and using many of the same methods that religion does, ironically. They punish them for stepping out of line even slightly, and reward people for doing the right thing according to the party line, which obviously encourages that behaviour, reinforces that behaviour, and makes it second nature if you are stuck in this situation for a full long amount of time. And everyone gets reviewed by 4 Communist Party committees right? And they have to be approved by all 4 committees to get free. So they have to absorb everything and be convincing enough to convince 4 committees of people, not just 4 people, not just one panel of 4 people, but 4 separate committees. They're even using data crunching, so predictive policing, personal data sifting. This is truly dystopian, and the social credit system and the data crunching on dissidents and other problem people, that's coming to the West bit by bit, whether through private groups like Facebook and Twitter, or through governments looking to bring in things like facial recognition under the excuse of anti-terrorism, or even recently someone was saying you should use facial recognition to confirm your age for using porn sites. That couldn't be abused at all, could it, by a bad actor or a hacker or whatever else? Because there are problems here. The Uyghurs do rebel against China. They do engage in terrorist actions, or have in the past. And this massive repression does work in the sense that there haven't been any terrorist incidents for 3 years or so. But is it worth it? Is it worth it to exchange freedom for security? And is this actually going to have eliminated the belief in Islam in the area? Or is it going to have created a whole bunch of extremely resentful and mentally damaged people? You be the judge. Less stories, so I'm maybe waxing a bit more lyrical than I normally do. Another story about the Tory Manifesto, which released Sunday afternoon. Unlike most of the other ones, there's no radical change in the Conservative Party manifesto. And as we covered with the nursing, even where they're promising stuff, it's pretty much smoke and mirrors. So when they talk about ending austerity, I wouldn't hold your breath, quite frankly. And he said no more taxes, but we need to raise taxes to fund all kinds of social programs and to pick up the slack from things that have gone wrong. I would much rather a party be honest about raising taxes, as the Lib Dems and the Greens and the Labour Party have. Well, honest to an extent. I don't think the Labour Party's really been honest about to what extent they're going to raise taxation, but still. And we can all afford to pay a little bit more to create a fairer society. But they're saying, no more taxes, no, everything's fine as it is. Even though austerity didn't work, we're not really going to try spending any more money on anything. We just kind of expect everything to work itself out. So there's a lot of promises that don't really amount to anything, or things that were already in process. Compared to the other parties, there's maybe 2-3 billion more spending, which isn't even catching up to the inflation amounts from when they kind of froze everything and brought in austerity. So, like as I've said before, the Green Party is literally promising you the earth. The Labour Party is metaphorically promising you the earth. The Conservative Party is saying they might stop kicking you in the balls if you vote for them. And yet they're in the lead. I think it's because they still sell themselves on this idea of being a safe pair of hands for the economy, which they're not, particularly in the era of Brexit. It's a mystery. Lots of people were very critical of Tesla's new launch of the Cybertruck, this pickup truck. It's very angular. It's like a 70s idea of what the future would look like. Or, one 70s idea of what the future would look like. Design ideas for the future have always gone really one of two ways: very angular or very round. Reality has been very round and pod-like. It's very hard to find a car that's distinctive today, because they all follow almost absolutely the rules of aerodynamics, which dictate a certain sort of teardrop type overall design. So it's very hard to find a car that's particularly distinctive. And then Tesla rolls out this kind of burnished metal looking, very angular pickup truck that doesn't even have an open back, and people reacted very negatively to it. Personally, I welcome the fact that they've gone for a rather radical design. If I could afford one, I might even buy one, though I've got no use for a pickup truck, and I think they're a stupid vehicle for most people. But if they did a car that looked like that, I'd be interested in buying one just because it's different, you know. But they had problems bringing it out. The windows shattered. People have reacted negatively to the design. It was such a botched launch that Tesla shares dived over 6%. There were several bad reviews. It's almost that. Remember in The Simpsons when Homer designs that car for his lost half-brother Herb, right? And it basically kills the company. It was a bit like that in a lot of ways, I think. But I think this is just a reflection of Musk knows his own mind, and yeah, that's how it goes. Like I say, I quite like it. It looks like a truck version of the DeLorean, which someone else has said actually. Jessica Caldwell of Edmunds Vehicle Marketplace, which I'm assuming is a website or a magazine or something. I think it looks good, but the thing is, right, despite all of this negativity, and despite the shattered windows and the less than perfect reaction, it's still got 150,000 orders. Is that a measure of people's fandom of Musk? Is that a measure of people's gullibility? Or is it a measure that online culture and the culture of critics and reviewers is becoming divided from the view of the public, even when it comes to vehicles and not just games? Good question. Right, we're going to talk about censorship. There have been protests outside Facebook. Naked protests, people holding up pictures of men's nipples, people dressing up as nipples or boobs and things outside various Facebook buildings. That's all to do with the kind of Free the Nipple campaign. But this puritanical attitude is bleeding over into Instagram as well. So there are a lot of people, adult stars, who post to Instagram. They don't post anything naked. They're always dressed, or pasties have made a comeback to cover people's nipples, all of that sort of thing. So that's all going on, and it's within their terms of service. But if you're a porn star and you're posting on Instagram, you're under real threat of having your account terminated out of the blue. And Instagram seems to be even less responsive than YouTube is to complaints and problems. And the thing is, even completely clean images are being removed. If you check Twitter, I think it's at Sabrina the Bunny. She does some adult pictures and things, but she posts clean ones on her Instagram. The one that got her Instagram suspended was her sitting in front of a whole bunch of pumpkins. All right, so you can go and check that out, and on Twitter, not on Instagram necessarily. And what is going on? It seems like they're just banning them for being porn stars, right? What I think is actually going on here is there's a certain two things. There's a sex negative movement on the left, which has increasingly engaged in attacks on adult stars and performers, sexy cosplay girls, and so on. Because they're saying, oh, you're just cool girls, you're not thinking of the collective good of the women's going into the future. There's a very puritanical streak on the left there, with the likes of Gail Dines and so on. And a lot of activists who will mass maliciously report content. And we've also seen the emergence on the kind of traditionalist right, the alt-right, or the socially conservative side. We've seen the emergence of people doing the same thing, and a whole bunch of malicious trolls who do the same thing. And it seems like there are thresholds, just as there are on Twitter, that they got rid of them and then they reinstated them, where when someone mass reports something, when they get a certain amount of reports in a certain amount of time that something is bad or wrong or pornographic or whatever, then they just automatically take that and the account down without actually having a human check it over, until and unless you can actually get through to a human being at Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, which is touch and go at the best of times. My old Twitter account was mass reported and taken off, and I couldn't get hold of a human being at Twitter to deal with the issue. So I'm intimately aware of this as well. But this is people's lives. This is people's businesses. Quite often, sex workers are relatively vulnerable to loss of funding and so on. So yeah, basically solidarity if you're in porn, and good luck in your fighting with Instagram and Facebook and whoever else. But it's coming from everywhere, and the increased automation of online systems just makes them vulnerable to abuse by things like mass reporting. The solution, from my point of view, is human oversight, even on sites this big. If you get a certain amount of reports, trigger human oversight and then deal with it, not take it down automatically. But this requires a change in culture to something that is more forgiving and understanding, and a change in the law to something that is more forgiving and understanding. And again, we've got more problems with that on YouTube lately, with this whole copper thing, and creators potentially being fined, at least American ones. I don't know how it works internationally, but bad actors plus bad automation equals bad outcomes, basically. Lots of different people have got their eyes set on the moon at this point. NASA wants to go back. Elon Musk wants to go to the moon. Jeff Bezos wants to go to the moon. China wants to go to the moon and has sent probes. India wants to go to the moon and has sent probes. The European Space Agency, which up until this point has been really highly commercial and quite limited, is also keen to go to the moon. So the various member state research ministers, science and research ministers, will be meeting in Seville in Spain next week. Of course, we'll be sending someone, I expect, but we're going to miss out if we Brexit, because we have no space program to speak of. And they're going to get together to fund research and engineering that will go alongside the US-led Artemis project, which is their return to the moon. Because Artemis is Apollo's sister, I think, if I'm remembering right. So they want to basically buy a couple of service modules, create some experiments and stuff to go along with it, and thereby buy in to the US efforts to go back to the moon. I would rather we had our own thing going on. Well, while we're still European, I can say that, I guess. But the ESA just seems to have relatively limited ambitions and not want to spend the big money. One of the things that's good about political and economic integration across Europe is that we could create a more unified space program. The ESA could more properly fit its name. It's similar to these ideas about an EU army. It's not in the offing, closer cooperation is, but I would be all for an EU army, because economy of scale and harmonised production and so on, you'd have a much more cost-effective military, and we could have a much more cost-effective space agency. But still, piggybacking on Artemis, it doesn't seem like a long-term solution for European participation in the space program to me. Sticking with space, SpaceX has had a problem with one of their launches. They were pressurizing a tank for a test, and it blew. So clearly they're going to have to revise their specs somewhat. This was for Starship, which is their sort of off-Earth cargo rocket. And then potentially it could take things to the moon and so on. But yeah, they're having some problems, unfortunately. So that's going to set back the private side of the space program, and I'm not sure I trust private programs with the space race either. Here's something that caught my eye, because we've known it for a long time, and we already know what the solutions are. Living near a busy road can stunt children's lung growth, study says. Now, I remember previously reading studies. I can remember previously reading studies about other health effects of living close to busy roads. Basically, the micropollutants from things like diesel. At least we don't have leaded petrol anymore. But they can cause all kinds of physical problems. Now they're stunting your growth of your lungs and other aspects. Basically, this micro pollution, it's hard to detect, but we do notice large differences, or relatively large differences in the number of things like cancers, educational issues, all kinds of other stuff. So if children in particular, because they get to live longer where there's a problem, children in particular who live close to busy roads, like house fronts onto the road, have their lung growth stunted by up to 14%. That's within 50 meters of a major road. It also increases your chance of lung cancer by 10%. And a higher chance of heart disease, stroke, heart failure, bronchitis, all kinds of other things. Like 13 separate health conditions that they studied seem to be affected by living close to roads. We've already seen issues with this in the past, and we've also already run tests on a solution. If you plant trees down the side of the road, it cuts this effect by, I'm having to go from memory here because I couldn't re-find the old article, something like 80%, because the trees block a lot of it. They prevent a lot of wash of the pollutants out onto the side of the road, and the trees absorb a lot of it. So we could solve a couple of issues. Planting a whole bunch of trees helps green the city, freshen the air, offsets some of the carbon footprint and so on, and also protects anyone who's living really close to the road. So encourage your councils to grow trees, avenues of trees down roads, and you've got that problem 80 to 90% solved right off the bat. But it's just interesting to see that the study I originally read, where they did the tree thing, I think it was just examining the levels of pollutants, whereas this talks about the effect. So we now know they have a bad effect, and we know how to mitigate that effect. Are we going to do it? Remains to be seen. Here's another bit of health news, so which isn't good. It's kind of a condemnation of the whole British system when it comes to cancer, really. Outcomes are good here in the UK once you get diagnosed, but we're bad at diagnosis and screening, and this appears to be why. This study was limited to Northern Ireland, but practices are broadly the same across the UK, at least particularly in Wales and England. But 1 in 5 cancer diagnoses occur in emergency departments. These are things that should be being picked up and checked on by your GP. You should be able to go to your GP fairly early on that you've got some kind of problem, and they should be able to identify cancer and refer you to a specialist early on. But what we're actually seeing happen is 1 in 5 cancer diagnoses are happening in accident and emergency, which is where they shouldn't. And by the time you're that bad, outcomes are a lot worse. So this is basically not a good thing at all. We need more cancer screening. And the thing is, screening saves money. If you bring in an effective cancer screening program like we have for breast cancer, and to a lesser extent for ovarian cancer or cervical cancer, the sooner you find it, the better outcomes are, and the less has to be spent. Whereas if you find out later on, outcomes are worse, and it's more costly and more draining on the whole system to deal with it. So cancer screening saves a lot of money, but we don't do it well enough, and that a lot of that falls on family doctors, general practitioners, GPs, who have incidentally just voted to reduce patient home visits. I don't think this is down to doctors being lazy or anything. They no longer have the capacity to offer them. Now, certainly our local doctors, they've been forced to merge with the doctors in the next village, well, the next town, really. And now it takes so long to be seen that you would normally be healthy, by the time you'd be seen. So, unless it's a total emergency, in which case they will drop things and make sure that they see you, you're waiting a long time. And I think this is going to end up contributing to problems. So why has this happened? Part privatization, efficiency drives, austerity. but that means that the service has just basically declined, and it's not efficient, even though it's good bedside manner, and it's better for people who might be bedridden or elderly or whatever for a doctor to come around your home. It's just not efficient, and if they choose to come out and visit someone at home, which might be convenient for someone who's elderly or crippled, or someone like me if I'm in a bout of anxiety and can't leave the house or whatever, having the doctor be able to come out and see me is a good thing. But the NHS operates on triage, so what's the most effective way to do things? How can they see the most people and get the most good outcomes? Have people come to them. It's just... There's no good answer, and I don't think the doctors are to blame here, but I'm sure they're going to end up taking a lot of the blame for this from people who haven't bothered to read into the story. So look, here's the underlying story. The NHS, including general practitioners, the sort of frontline medical services that aren't A&E, they're underfunded, overstretched, part privatised. These are all problems that have made it worse. And I live in a good area, and the health service here has been degraded, particularly when it comes to GPs, family doctors and mental health services. And I'm a winner in the postcode lottery. I still wouldn't do anything to get rid of the NHS, because without it I would essentially have no support whatsoever. But something needs to be done, and fiddling around the edges like the Tory Manifesto talks about, or the Lib Dem Manifesto isn't much better on that score. It isn't going to solve the issue. There has been fighting in cinemas, including a machete brawl at a cinema chain. After this new film, Blue Story, I think it's by Ratman, is it? Was out. Not sure whether it's him or not. Yes, Ratman. So this film, Blue Story, is about basically knife gangs and so on in London. The problem's nowhere near as bad as Americans seem to think it is. But then, just to make me look like an idiot for saying that, a knife brawl broke out at a cinema amongst two groups of lads who'd gone to see the film. Completely missing the point of the film, if you ask me. They're looking to see something that glamorizes gang violence, and this isn't it. It's preaching at them, but they still went to see it. And they got into a fight over it. So, yeah, and these are young kids. People who were held by police include a girl of 13, a girl and a boy both aged 14, a 19-year-old man. These are people who assaulted police, and a boy of 14 was held for obstructing police. And it's a shame, because this is a film with a positive message aimed at exactly these people, which they clearly haven't taken in, though I imagine the fight broke out before they even saw the film. But it's a big shame. And how are you supposed to help people? Who knows? Give me one sec. Right, I think that's everything. Any comments or questions from anybody? Let's have a look. No, just people saying good morning. Well, good morning to you. I'll give you a couple of minutes in case you do want to ask me anything. Otherwise, I'm going to get on. Got to help walk the dog soon. Not something I like doing. I don't like dogs. Why would I get a dog? Oh, cool. See-through can. Ooh. Ooh. God, I love green screen. No. Alright then, I shall go and get on. Take care, everyone. Like I say, I might do the Conservative Party manifesto a bit later. Don't think I'm going to probably bother doing any others. I might do the Liberal Democrat manifesto, but the Greens pretty predictable. But they're never going to get into power. I suspect Caroline Lucas will be voted back in. They might get another MP. Outside chance they'll get 3, I think. But there's not a lot there to go into. Lib Dem manifesto is basically the Labour manifesto turned down to about 3. but so better than the Tory Manifesto, because they actually promise stuff and they promise change, and most of it's the same kind of stuff the Labour Manifesto talked about. So I might go through the Tory one, and I will struggle and strive to be relatively neutral. Otherwise, I'll be beavering away at Machinations of the Space Princess stuff. I'll see you later then. Take care, everyone. Bye. Zang.